Did you know that businesses that are in the press see an average increase of 30% in website traffic and are perceived to be 1.6 times more credible by consumers? By the end of this video, you'll be able to understand the pieces of the puzzle behind getting publicity. You'll understand the key elements that make a story newsworthy, why it's important to build strong relationships with journalists, and why you need to master the timing of your pitches. You'll also learn how to tailor your pitches to different media outlets like newspapers, magazines, podcasts, radio, TV, and online publications. And you'll also learn why you need to measure the impact of your media coverage. Let's dive in. Do you ever wonder why your pitches to journalists aren't getting picked up? This might be because the angles in the stories you're pitching aren't newsworthy. If you're sending out stories and aren't newsworthy, you'll continue to be ignored and overlooked by the media. But if you can learn what the journalists are looking for, you will be able to find stronger hooks in your business and write more compelling pitches, which means you can increase the chances of getting coverage. To make a story newsworthy, you need to make sure it's one of a few things. It must be relevant now. When everybody is talking about something, that is the time to send your pitch to say, hey, I can talk about this, as long as it's relevant, which is another criteria. There's no point pitching an outlet that doesn't cover the topic you want to talk about or the audience aren't interested in it. For example, if the podcast that you're trying to pitch is one that focuses on how people made it in their business, it's not going to be relevant if you want to talk about politics or education. Another criteria to consider is how many people it will impact. Something that is only going to affect a small number of people won't be as newsworthy as a story that is going to affect a lot of people. So think about your local press versus your national press here. Something relevant and timely for people, say, in the south of England, might not be newsworthy for people in the north of England. So if it's a small bunch of people affected in somewhere like Portsmouth, it's going to be newsworthy to their local press in that area, but not for the nationals that covers the whole of the UK. Another criteria for newsworthiness is if the story is going to make people feel various emotions. We call this the human interest angle. And there are loads of media and podcasts that love a good story that pull at the heartstrings, especially if it's something that's completely novel or unusual. Think about the stories you've heard where people have overcome all the odds to succeed, or have had to work really hard to get where they are, and they've faced all sorts of challenges. These kinds of stories are interesting and engaging for the audience, and therefore they're newsworthy. An action you can take away to work on is to research the outlets that you're targeting so that you can make sure that your pitches are newsworthy for their journalists and their audience. So look at what kind of stories they write about and what headlines they're using. And you can use that as a template for your own stories that you're coming up with from your business. When you understand newsworthiness, your stories will resonate more and you'll see that your pitches will probably get picked up a bit more, which means increased coverage and visibility. The second tip is all about building relationships with journalists. A common issue entrepreneurs ask me about is why they get no responses. So the first thing is the newsworthiness, but this can happen for a variety of reasons, and it can be demoralizing and frustrating, but it happens to all of us. You just cannot take it personally. Are you sending out pitches as well, but not getting any responses? While your stories can definitely be picked up if they're newsworthy, without having a personal connection with a journalist, your story might get lost in the sea of pitches they receive daily. I know of some editors at national newspapers who receive around 1,000 pitches a week. Can you imagine your inbox being like that? Please let me know in the comments if you are having to deal with that. Without building relationships, your pitches might be being ignored. But if you take the time to connect with journalists, show them you are reliable and can give them what they need and when they need it, they'll be much more receptive to your stories and come back to you the next time they need an expert to talk about your area of expertise. I have one client who's a feng shui expert, and she keeps getting emailed by the same freelance journalist who works across a number of home interior and design magazines. So now my client has been used in 3 articles across these different publications, and they are circulated to over 300,000 people, and all of that in 2 months. So tell me, I'm curious to know, how do you respond to suppliers who reach out to you? Do you build relationships with some of them and then work with them again and again? I know I do, and this is how most journalists are too. So it's thinking about ways to make their lives easier and how you can add value to them. Because if you can do that, on top of being reliable and responsive, they will appreciate you and be more open to building a relationship with you. So the action here is to start by following the journalists on your media list, follow them on their social media channels, and keep track of what they're putting out there and find ways to help them. So you can like their stories, you can share their stories, you can engage with their content. If you see that they're looking for a certain expert and you know somebody who can fit that bill, introduce them. This way they start getting familiar with your name. And this means when they see your name pop up in their inbox with a pitch, they're more likely to be receptive to reading that. And this means, again, an increased chance of getting media exposure. Before I give you the next few tips, I just wanted to say hello. My name is Karen Fields, and I help entrepreneurs and experts become highly visible, go-to industry experts using the power of publicity. If you've had any aha moments so far, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more of this type of content. I also will give you at the end a link to a freebie download that is a guide to a media kit. So stay tuned for that as well. Let's look at the third element you need to know about, and that is timings and deadlines. So I ask, do you know when to pitch your stories? Many entrepreneurs miss out on coverage because they don't understand the media's timing and deadlines. And just to make things more interesting for those of us trying to pitch them, they're all different. And if you pitch at the wrong time, your story might get lost. But if you know the best times to pitch, your story is more likely to be seen and picked up. A rule of thumb is that for breaking news, you want to pitch early in the morning on the day the news is breaking or the day you want the news to break. There are lots of PR industry studies that show journalists like being pitched on a Monday, and they usually are. But if your story is not news breaking, then you could wait until a day or time later in the week when the journalist's inbox isn't so overwhelmed. It very much depends on the type of publication you're going for and the story that you have. So do some research first to find out about your key media target schedule and their deadlines so that you can time your pitches perfectly. By pitching at the right times, your stories have a high chance of being seen, which means they have a higher chance of being covered. So moving on to tip number 4, which is all about understanding the different media outlets. Are you sending the same pitch to every media outlet? This can be ineffective because they have different audiences and different needs, and journalists can sniff out a mass-produced pitch, and they do not like it. If you don't tailor your pitches, it won't resonate with the target outlet and their audience. But if you do customize your pitches, they'll be more relevant, and then they're more likely to be accepted. One thing I suggest to my clients to do is to read a few of the articles that a journalist has written, or if it's a podcast, listen to a few of the episodes. And then talk about in your pitch why you resonated or liked something that they've worked on before. This tells the journalist subconsciously that you've done your research and that what you're likely to pitch is going to be relevant to those people. You can also mention in your pitch, I think what I'm going to say or what I have to tell your audience they'll enjoy or be interested in because. And that again also reiterates that you've done your research. Tailored pitches are much more compelling to journalists who are very time poor and looking for good stories, which will mean they're going to be more likely to pick up your pitch as well. Tip number 5 is all about making sure you keep making improvements in what you do. And you can do this by measuring your media impact. Do you know how to measure the impact of your media coverage? Many entrepreneurs don't track this because they just don't know what metrics to use. Without measuring your efforts and your impact, you won't know what's working or not working, and that means you can't make data-driven decisions to refine your approach or strategy. But if you track the right metrics, you can understand what's working and then improve your efforts. And as business owners, we all need to make sure we're making the most of our time, right? So there are lots of tools you can use to monitor your press coverage. A lot of them are paid for, but to keep it simple and free, especially when you're first starting out, is you want to keep track of how many pieces of coverage you're getting, and within those, what messages are getting picked up. So before you go and do any interviews, work out what the 1 to 3 key messages are that you want people to remember about what you've said and that they could go on to tell their friends. So you want to see if your messages then got picked up in the coverage, and then you want to check what the tone of the coverage was. If it's good, great, share it. If it's bad, you're going to want to try and rectify it. And there are ways of doing this. So when you start tracking and you can see the tone of coverage, you can then also track the traffic coming across to your website and to your socials. And then you can see if this is bringing more people to you. Now, the audiences there are much more engaged and more likely to take action. So I do recommend bringing podcasts into your strategy if you haven't already. And you'll start seeing, you might be getting more response from one type of coverage than from another. But remember, PR is a long-term game. So you might not see immediate spikes, but you will see an increase over time, and you want to track that. One thing you can do as well for your podcasts is you can give them a unique, or you can give them a freebie download that you can either mention on the interview or the podcast host can share afterwards. And you give a unique URL for each podcast. And this way you can track who's coming in from which podcast. So which one was a good use of your time. And then you can stay in touch with them by getting their email addresses as well. Another number to track is how people heard about you. And you can do this by asking them. And there's a number of ways you can do that. But you can ask them to reply in their newsletters. You can ask them when you're on a call or speaking to them, or you can even ask them on email how they heard about you, which will again tell you whether your PR efforts are working or if it's your marketing, for example. By measuring the impact, you'll be able to refine your strategy and use your time the most effectively and get better results over time. I have a free guidebook, as I mentioned earlier, on how to create your own media kit so that you know what you need to include with your pitches when you're reaching out to journalists. This gives them everything they need in one place. And again, it's part of becoming a trusted go-to expert. Click on the link below to grab it. You can also subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website at theprengine.co.uk. And if you do, you'll get access to special discounts and resources. I look forward to getting to know you and your business.